All signs point to this, as we have a massive report talking about Fred VanVleet and his contract negotiations with the Houston Rockets, and whether or not VanVleet will be in Rocket Red next year and long term. Welcome into Rockets Digest. I'm Jace Andrews. We're happy to have you along here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's completely 100% free, and we're on our way to 1,500 subscribers. Let's talk about Fred VanVleet and kind of get the baseline going. We know that the overall arching theme that Fred VanVleet has said is he wants to be with the Rockets next year. Obviously, the Rockets did impressive things this past season. 52 wins. They finished second in the Western Conference. And VanVleet was part of the rebuild. He wants to stay here, wanting it to be a long-term success. But do the Rockets want the same thing? What does the league think? We finally got a report on what is expected to happen today. Let's go into that report right now. And this coming from Jake Fisher of the Stein Line and saying, quote, veteran reporter Jake Fisher, as I mentioned, says, working assumption among NBA executives is for veteran point guard Fred VanVleet to remain with Houston into the next season and potentially beyond. So that is a major, major thing right there, because there was talks that maybe the Rockets were going to cut ties with Fred VanVleet in terms of letting him go explore the market in some aspects. And while that was talked about in some aspect, we knew that the overarching theme was that Fred VanVleet was not going to come back to the Rockets on that $44 million contract. That was not a part of the plan. That contract was for the rebuild, and it did exactly that. Now the contract has to go a little lower to keep these Rockets under that first apron. And so they are going to decline that team option. However, they want him back in Houston. He wants to be back in Houston. And so it's more about how can they make that happen. And so this is where we go into the Shams tweet. And we've shown this before, but we know that they pushed back that deadline to June 29th with a $44 million team option for 2025-2026. Now, this was originally to give both sides additional time for navigating and exercising that option. But I think the big thing is the last sentence here: completing a longer-term deal. The Rockets want Fred VanVleet in Houston for, in my mind, the rest of his career. I would think the best contract for the Rockets is a way lower AAV, but something that's, maybe 6 years long. Maybe something to keep him in here until his age 37 season. Now, that has now been confirmed, and what do the terms look like? Well, that's where we continue on in the report. We go to Rockets Wire with Ben DeBose saying, June 29th is the deadline for a majority of team or player options across the league. Since each player's year's free agency windows open on the evening of June 30th, thus that June 29th date provides the maximum time possible to negotiate and or make a decision prior to the start of the new fiscal year. Now, obviously, bunch of things to read into that. That's when free agency starts. So people who have been asking, when does that start? What would happen? When can we expect deals to start being made? And, let's say dominoes to fall in that aspect. That's when it's going to happen on June 30th, or the eve of that night. So we can expect a lot to happen on June 30th. Again, make sure you're here. We're going to have videos on whatever the Rockets do. And on top of which, we also know that this is the time where we're probably going to see the Fred VanVleet done the day before. In my mind, they're not going to get to free agency. Obviously, that team option is going to be declined, but it's going to be a very quick decline, sign. That's why they pushed the deadline to June 29th in my mind. It was not to see if they wanted to keep Fred VanVleet. It was not to see if maybe this was the right decision or not. It was the decision to try and give them as much time as possible to talk to VanVleet, talk about a contract, what would he want, what do the Rockets want, how do they meet in the middle, and come to terms before we even get to that situation. And that is now kind of confirmed in a lot of aspects. This is where we continue on in the report saying this, or excuse me, not the report, but more or less looking at Fred VanVleet's stats here. I believe that he is a player that the Rockets should keep in a lot of aspects, and he is a fan favorite. I mean, I'm curious to see what y'all think, and I have a question at the end of this video for you, but VanVleet is relatively loved by most Rockets fans because he came in here with a dream, with a thought. Same thing with Ime Udoka. They came in here knowing that the Rockets team could be as good as it was this year, and honestly can be better. But the big thing is VanVleet was the leader in that. He's been the veteran presence. He got into a lot of big situations in the playoffs against the Warriors, and he came through. He has that experience playing with Toronto in the finals. He knows what he's doing, and I love his attitude. Plus, in a lot of aspects, yes, we are a young and experienced team now because you have that experience with the playoffs. But VanVleet still needs to be in that veteran presence. If you look at this team and you see the young guys, they're not going to be more than 23, 24 years old. The most of this roster is in fact below that age threshold. To have VanVleet here, to make sure that you have that guy to kind of, I'm not going to say calm the room, but be the guy that everybody listens to when he talks. That's a huge, huge, huge thing. And now we go into more of a report, and this is kind of the big thing. 31 years old, obviously he wants to get additional years of guaranteed money. When you're 31 in the NBA, and especially as a player like Fred VanVleet, you'd probably like a more long-term deal in his aspect, because he's not going to go to the open market and get $44 million a year. That's just not going to happen. He got the big contract for a couple years for the Rockets, knowing that this was the plan, and now it's to try and win. It's to try and make the money work. And obviously, the team's incentive, they want to incentivize VanVleet to consider a reduced annual value, which could provide Houston additional space to help build out its roster. Now, that's a huge thing, and the terms are obviously big when it comes to this. And obviously, we go to Ben DeBose again, Rockets Wire, basically the same thing, saying, quote, in this case, all indications are that VanVleet wants to remain with the Rockets, and the team wants to retain him in his starting role. The question is simply terms. And that's a lot to talk about, because terms really can make or break this deal. And don't get me wrong, I love Fred VanVleet, and I want him to be in Rocket Red. However, I would really, really like if this deal could be a good fit more for the Rockets than VanVleet. He got a lot of money, and I'm not saying he's not deserving of it, but now I think it's more of a time for him to kind of pay back the Rockets in a way, saying, hey, you trusted in me, and we are now here, and I am a big presence, and I am loved by these fans. And so, how exactly do these terms come? Well, here is the projected salary, and of course the Houston Rockets starting five, reserves, free agents, and obviously exceptional stuff. The big thing when you try and look at this is the projected salary kind of in the middle right part of this graphic. The tax threshold is at $187.8 million. The first apron, that's such a huge thing, and that is $195.9 million. The Rockets do not want to go past that first apron. That is not something that this team really wants to do at all, just because fiscally that does not make sense, especially when you're trying to build a team from these younger stars, and hopefully, maybe this first apron will grow up in the next couple of years. Hopefully, in a couple of years, maybe you'll have the money to pay that extra tax, or you're close to a championship, you've made the finals, you've whatever, and you're willing to try and pay extra for that year, knowing that you have a big chance to go out there and win. Now, as much as I want to say that is this year, they are like, oh, we're right on the doorstep, I think they want another year of going to the playoffs. They want another year of this team being a top team in the Western Conference, especially with how good this Western Conference is. So they're going to try and keep this money below that first apron. And right now, they are right on the border. And you see those free agents, Steven Adams, Jeff Green. Aaron Holiday is a team option, so they could easily let him go and get some money in that. Jae'Sean Tate and Jack McVay and Dante down there. The big name that I look at there is Steven Adams. You want him back, and that is exactly what this report has with our Rockets wire guy, Ben DeBose, saying, quote, as one example, the Rockets would love to re-sign veteran center Steven Adams, and having VanVleet on the books at a lower figure in 2025-2026 could perhaps free up an additional resource for Adams. First of all, a couple things there. He is obviously saying that the Rockets want Steven Adams back. People don't realize Steven Adams, he acts like he's been in this league forever, and in some ways he has, but he's actually pretty decently young for what you would expect from him, low 30s, so he is going to be an awesome piece for this Rockets team to have. I would love to have him come back. Plus, in the league, he has always been in the best rebounding team in the NBA. He was on the Rockets this year, and they were the best rebounding team in the NBA this year. The hope is you can keep him, you can retain him, and that way he will be able to keep that rebounding going. Now, at the same time, if you can free up some more money, you can pay Steven Adams and still have a couple bucks to go out there and sign some free agents. Now, I'm not going to say the free agent market is great this season whatsoever, but with how much we've talked and how many trade aspects we've brought up, it still seems like the main force or driving force for Rafael Stone is to keep this team together. If a trade down the line, maybe closer to September, comes around and it looks like a good deal, then that's great for him. But if nothing happens until then and not a good deal comes across his desk, he's not rushing to make a trade. He likes this team. He wants this team to be together. However, he does want to make some moves to make this team better. And so that would be keeping Fred VanVleet in a better contract, signing Steven Adams, and maybe going out there making a small trade or going out there and signing from some free agents. So that is a big thing because shooting is something the Rockets definitely need help with. Fred VanVleet is good at has a really great shooting percentage a lot of the time. So in that aspect, it'd be nice to keep him around and try and go add another shooter. Now, I want to try and move on with this report as well. And this is where we kind of get the sense of Fred VanVleet and what he wants in this. He said this at the last press conference after losing to the Warriors, and obviously he was asked about his contract negotiations, what he would want to do this offseason. He said, quote, "I put my heart and soul into this, and this is where I want to be. It was never a short-term vision. It was a long-term goal. We're on track. We're on schedule." I love this from Fred VanVleet. Couple different things I want to point out. We're on track. Everybody, when the Rockets lost to the Warriors, were like, okay, obviously that number 2 seed was a fluke. But people kind of forget this Rockets team was 500 last year. I mean, when the fact that we were even, I'm going to say, in the playoffs and at a high seed, not in the play-in, was impressive of itself. The fact that you were a 2 seed in a absolutely loaded Western Conference makes that all the better. Fred VanVleet gave you a little insight there. This is what the Rockets expected. The Rockets, when they signed him, say, we have this long-term vision. This is what we expect to happen. This was what they expected. They expected to be in the playoffs. I don't know if they expected to be the 2 seed, but they expected to be in the playoffs. And they did exactly that. Now we go to his coach, obviously, Ime Udoka. Also, wrong one. Ime Udoka obviously also talked about him on May 4th, saying, quote, "I think both sides want him here. He's a huge part of our growth. I love everything he's done. Perfect combo of on and off ball for our guards and young guys to grow. I'd love to have him back, and I think the feeling is mutual," end quote. Both sides want Fred VanVleet back here, but both sides also know that the contract has to be right. And Fred VanVleet, as he should, deserves to get his payday, deserves to get his money. But at the same time, he got his payday when he signed the original deal with the Rockets, getting a lot of AAV. Now it's time to separate that out. However, there is going to be some hard talks because he is owed $44 million if they do not exercise that team option. Now, he is not going to go anywhere on the open market and make that type of money. But it's going to be a tough sell if the Rockets say, yeah, we want you to 7 years, $10 million each. Yeah, you're going to make $70 million, $60 million, whatever that deal ends up being. But you were going to make $44 million this year. So that's going to be a tough sell for sure. So there's kind of a lot to discuss with that, and that's why they waited until June 29th. That's why that decision was made to prolong this a little bit. And so that's where my question finishes out here with you as I ask, should the Rockets keep Fred VanVleet for the long haul? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments. And you really want to make sure you read that last word, long haul. And what I mean by that is 4, 5, 6 years, probably 5 or more, to be honest. I could see them easily setting him to a 4-year, a little bit higher AAV value, but I think what they would like is a 5, or I think what Fred VanVleet has to consider is the Rockets are willing to give him a 6-year deal, just lower money, but he's going to be guaranteed that money. Whereas if he signs the 4-year deal, and it's a lot of money, and say year 4 comes around and they're like, same situation here. I don't know if we want to pay you. Our team is a good place. We don't know what the Rockets will look like at that point. It's not guaranteed. So that's a huge thing to consider. Yes or no, should the Rockets keep him for the long haul? We appreciate y'all watching and all the support. Of course, as always, hit that subscribe button. And get in the comment section. I love seeing all your comments and talking ball with y'all. So appreciate y'all, and peace out here from H-Town.